Okay, welcome everybody. I'm Tara. I'm with Community Mediation in Calvert County along with Laverne. We are so pleased to join you today. It's really inspiring to see so many of you here today. We're going to open up the discussion now. It's really important to us that everybody gets heard, and we're going to do our best to include everybody. So if you have a comment, then please raise your hand physically, and we're going to do our best to see that on our screen and call on everybody. So I'm going to go ahead with the first question, which is, how could the Colonial Church reconcile the message of love with slavery? Let's see. We have a hand up. Nancy?
I hope some people here have read the book Stamped from the Beginning by Ibram Kendi. Couple of things. What he talks about is that this idea of saving the Black souls, that they were savages, they came from Africa with no spirituality, they were basically uncivilized, and that the idea was that it was the church's duty as Christians to save their souls, that they could become, quote, white if they were exposed to and inculcated in the right way to be. So that's sort of, and the other idea that comes out of those writings is that, and I would relate this to Ken Phelps, who left, but I wonder if what he read was his own ideas or Professor Hunt's. The issue of the laws around interracial cohabitation and Congress between white women and Black men may have been couched in church, in religious terms, but as Kendi says, other ways of dealing with what really is an issue of race that may not have been stated, but racist ideas are often, in fact, he says all the time, I wouldn't go that far, but often racist ideas give rise to racist behavior, not the other way around. In order to justify your behavior, you use these other ways of speaking about a racial issue, like, well, it's a religious issue, not a race issue.
So Nancy, I heard you say that it's oftentimes referred to as a religious issue and not just a race issue.
No, it's not, they don't want to say it's a race issue. So they couch it in some other term, but the racist behavior leads to racist ideas to justify that behavior. So the stated racist reason is couched in some other way of saying it so that you don't have to say it's racist, but what it really is racist. And I'm not sure you can separate those laws that talked about Black men and white women coming together. You can't say they're not racist just because they said it was on the basis of religion. That is, we see that all the time today. People saying, oh, well, it's there's some other reason that this isn't racist. I'll use some other rationale to say that these people need to be separated or need to be treated this way, other than racism, when racism is the real reason.
Okay, so I heard you say racism is the real reason, but it's often couched in other forms. Okay.
This is Cheryl Munn. Yeah, it's to get back to your question, how can you reconcile slavery with, in those days with Christian love? And I think part of what Ken presented today illustrates that, and that is it was bound up with the economics of the time, and they used the economics to justify the reality of slavery, and not only the reality of it, but to the actual justification of it. Was really what really came out of the economics of the plantation system and the tobacco growing system, and I think they like so many people, and my background is as a biblical scholar, but anyway, they go to the Bible and find what they want to find in terms of justification of any position they want to take, racist or otherwise. And and when you take parts of scripture in isolation like that and bring it out, you can rewrite your own scripture, which so many people do, and they did, it seems to me, in order to justify what was they saw as an economic necessity in the day. And so I think that's part. I'm not saying that's all of the answer. I think that's part of the answer of why and how they would justify the idea of Christian love and slavery, and also what was just said, thinking that their attempts to save, as we could say, convert the slave populations to Christianity, and therefore them, enjoying the blessings of salvation and so forth, in their mind probably was seen as an act of love, even though it was, you look at now we look back on it with the utter hypocrisy of it. And but I think getting to the question itself, those are some of the reasons why and how they justified it.
Okay, so it was justified from an economic standpoint.
Yeah.
And so it sounds like, going back on what Nancy said, that it was looked at by Christians that you were bringing Christianity to this culture, and that was a form of sharing your love and sharing Christianity with the slaves. Going back to kind of what Nancy brought up with the book she had read. That's a really good point.
That is a really good point.
You ready with number 2?
Yeah. Yes, we'll do the second question is, does similar justification continue today in today's church?
Oh,
Lisa, I see you shaking your head.
go ahead and do it. There we go.
You unmute.
Yes, yeah, it does. Basically, the solution for most of our churches after the Civil War was just simply separating. For our Black brothers and sisters to have their own home where they knew they were welcome when they were more or less ousted from many white churches. And we have not really gotten away from that, nor made enough effort to get away from that. And to respect, maybe our Black brothers and sisters don't think it would be coming home to come to someplace like All Saints if that's where they had their church's origins. That's not home for them.
Okay, so pretty much what you're saying is, although, for an example, all Saints would welcome them and want them to feel your Black sisters and brothers to feel at home, but they may not necessarily feel at home.
Correct. And it takes a lot of work before one even feels welcome. I mean, when we show in good faith that we have grappled with the real.
That froze.
I think she's frozen.
Propagated through into today, and there's a starting place.
Yeah, excuse me. This is Cheryl Munn again. Yeah, I think that, following emancipation, I think it was probably a very natural thing for former slaves to move away from the institutions of the planter class that enslaved them, and it's in some ways remarkable that they maintained their own witness to their Christian faith by starting other churches and other denominations following that, and continued. And my guess is too that became such a meaningful thing to them, and that continues today. It's one thing to say we most certainly would welcome anybody back, and so, but that you've got well over a century of fellowship in those churches and organizations, and I think it's only natural that people would feel comfortable there and feel like, and if it's been something that's meeting their needs over time, I'm not sure, even if we are very welcoming, we would necessarily want to return. I think perhaps the way to start bringing us together is, sure, come to grips with the reality of the past, but do some of the things we're starting to do, cooperative efforts and work with them, with those churches, I mean, and over time, build that relationship and build trust.
So what I would say is that it's quite remarkable that the Black members of the church did go on and build their own church, even have different denominations. And despite any efforts that you have, or how much willingness you have to welcome them back and want them to feel welcome, you understand that they might be very comfortable where they are and enjoy, and their needs are being fulfilled where they are. And one way to build a bridge is to work with these other churches and let them know you're welcome here, and that we want to be welcome where you are, and we respect what you've built, and we also want to work with you. And that leads to that welcoming heart.
Yeah, that's you pretty much grasp, I think, what I was trying to say. And I think sometimes I think sometimes it's a problem if we try to push an agenda that we have that maybe others don't have. And I mean, like I said, they may be, the people in these other churches may be perfectly comfortable where they are and in that situation and not see an issue. But that doesn't mean we can't, I mean, an issue in terms of where they are and their worship and their fellowship and their community and so forth. But that doesn't mean we can't reach out and try to work with those other churches, get them, help them understand us as well.
Martha had a comment.
You just want to open up a dialogue or open up some communication and
Yeah, I think that's where we start.
yeah, it's a good start. Betsy, you have your hand up.
Sorry, Martha had a comment and I can go to someone else.
I
Oh.
had my hand up since the first question. One of the things I was thinking was, in the colonial period, the church was an agent of the state. And it was seen as an agent of the state. It could deal out punishments and all sorts of things. It wasn't about sharing Christ's love with the slaves. It was just, baptizing because they believed people should be baptized, marrying because they believed people should be married more than the love of Christ. And I think once, the Methodist Church started really growing in our county, I think at that time, the Methodist Church was not seen as a separate denomination. It only grew into that after the Wesleys. And so I think people who were enslaved might feel more welcome in a church that had never been an agent of the state as All Saints was when it was formed.
So Betsy, you're saying that to discuss the real origins of the church is what you want understood, and trying to understand how race has changed through the church history.
Well, I was basically saying that, the church and state were separate when the colonies were. And the church had some of the same powers in this country that the Anglican Church in England had. If you lived, someone's talking, I don't know who, but if you lived in the All Saints parish and you ran away to another parish to escape something, they could bring you back to All Saints parish because that's where you belonged. I mean, it was a totally different system than the way we look at church today. And it's only after, we started becoming a separate country and developing our own churches separate from the Church of England that things changed. So I don't think we could really equate the Anglican Church within the colonial period with what we have today. If Ken wants to disagree with that, I would be happy to listen to his arguments because we always disagree well.
So you're saying since the church was an agent of the state, that it wasn't just what we were saying, that it was a means of spreading Christianity. This was something that was used as more of a ruling thing in this, and that there were laws that had to be followed, and you couldn't leave, you would be brought back. That if we're honest with those origins, that's the first step in building these building transition.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great point. I have on mine, it says All Saints. You've had your hand up for a while, and then we'll get back to Nancy. I think is what I'm seeing. Guy with the collar.
Well, thanks. Yeah, it's not, yeah, I'm going under the assumed name of All Saints today, but no, I too wanted to comment. I wanted to go back to Nancy's comment earlier, and then I'll pick up Betsy and kind of move forward to the other side into question two. But it should not be lost that, I want to pick up on something Cheryl had said, that slavery has always been about economics. But what was unique here is that suddenly it became synonymous with race, and that is a huge difference. And it's that phenomenon, and there are many elements to that. And part of, I think, and Dr. Hunt, I'm remembering some of those other comments as he, and again, it's his presentation. I think it's a sound one. But even in that, as he said in one of his lectures that I heard him give, it really does come down to being about sex. And there is this, I don't want to use the term jealousy, but it's present there. That, there was something about the fact that white women preferred African men. And you had this explosion in mulatto birth. And that becomes part of that equation. And and again, it's part of that larger puzzle that, why is it that, slavery has always existed and it's always been about economics, but why now does race become, intertwined in that? And I think that's part of the riddle that we need to unlock. I was going to say too about the saving of souls and what have you. There was a movement within the priests who were coming from England, particularly as the anti-slavery movement increased there, that you began to find in the colonies, priests who were abolitionists in nature, and it was almost at some times a tug of war between them and the assembly. I know there was a movement afoot that the race to baptize slaves was so that once they were baptized Christians, they could not be enslaved. But then legislation is passed that makes it quite clear that no matter what their affiliation might be, that whether they're baptized Christian or not, they are still considered slaves in this system. So almost a I don't want to say tit for tat, but you can see these different trajectories all running through. It's not just one monolithic, well, yeah, with this or with that. Many things are going on.
Right. So there were many factors. Originally it was said that it's an economic thing. Slavery was an economic thing, but then it turned into a racial thing. As like we saw in the video, there was indentured servants, and those were different races. And then it turned into just slavery was just African Americans. That's a good point. I think I know you have some other comments, but I think we really need to move on to the third question, and then we'll just keep going. Third question, if so, how does it compare to colonial justification? And, hang on. Go ahead, Nancy.
Okay, how does it link to, well, I actually have to go back to the second question a little bit, because this idea of linking up with other churches, inviting them in, white people have a bad tendency to think that they need to, and I don't want to use the word assimilate, I'm trying to think of something different, but that's the idea of bring in African Americans to their institutions, which is not a position of allyship. Allyship means you go to their institution and you say, how can I help you do what you want to do? And that is hard for some of us to learn. But it is the only way to really develop the trust and the companionship to work with other organizations. It may be that move will lead to some collaborative effort, that will make them feel more comfortable to coming to you. But we have to prove that we are allies before we can invite them in.
You want to show that you're allies before welcoming them in, and that you want to work with them and go even to their churches and help them extend what they're doing.
I would say not even, I would say especially to their churches.
Especially.
Kip?
Give me just a second.
Sure.
Thank you. The question I think you're on right now is, if so, does a similar justification continue today? And if so, how does it compare to colonial times? I think the comparison is uncomfortably the same. We hear in discussions recently and appropriately the idea of white privilege. And I think in colonial times, it was endorsed by the state. It was made a matter of law, and it was to protect the privilege of the landowners, the wealthy, and was essential to maintaining their privileged place carried over from England. Now I think it's very much the same. One thing that isn't talked about too much is post-World War II, when the veterans came back and the laws were passed to provide easy ways for them to get loans for they could affordably buy houses. What isn't discussed so much is that the US government made it exceedingly difficult for non-whites to take advantage of those loans. And where we created a middle class with those loans post-World War II, we officially and intentionally denied many people of color the same access to middle class wealth through home ownership. And I think that was driven by very similar justification. That is protecting the vested interests of at the time, white veterans. And now, as you look at it, I'm not so sure that our justification isn't very similar. It's real hard to acknowledge that if you give people parity, equity, that it may cost you something to do that. And I think some of the reluctance to establish truly equitable baselines for people, including the area of the ability to grow wealth, is based in that rather protective attitude by those who have wealth now. Hadn't changed a lot in many ways.
Okay, so I believe I heard you say that you said a couple of things there, that we have unjustifiably denied Blacks who came back from World War II as veterans just to buy a home, but have protected whites in improving their homes. So things are in comparison the same then in colonial times as is now.
Yes, to a great extent. I mean, a similar motivation at the time, protecting privilege, I think motivated that post-World War II effect as it did for a much smaller group of people in colonial time.
Lynn?
Since this is a group of people who are believers in the Episcopal Church, I think that it's natural to analyze what happened as far as what went on between the races as a matter of religion. But Betsy's comment continues to resonate in my mind, simply because I look to history. I look to the fact that in the but during the colonial period, the English fought the French in North America, the French and Indian Wars. And there was huge worry by the English that the French would try to come back. The English also fought the Spanish, or were worried about Spanish encroachments on their territories. There was a large civil war in England between the Catholics and various Protestant groups, Episcopalians, Presbyterians, and so forth. So there was a real political component to your religious belief. All this leads me to my observation that those who wanted to baptize Native Americans and Africans may not have been genuinely interested in their spiritual salvation so much as branding them as Episcopalians or Anglicans so that they wouldn't be tempted to, or they would be prevented from, or arguing against siding with the French or the Spanish or any other group. So I think that that was also a dimension of what people did in seeing others and in baptizing them. It wasn't necessarily a spiritual matter. It was also very much a political matter. And so I think Betsy's point is well taken.
Okay, so it was more of a political matter or component,
I would
more
say it's
so
both.
than spiritual,
I would say it's both.
both. Okay. Do I see any other hands? Okay, then let's go to the next question. Most white churches, including All Saints, profess and even believe that all are welcome, yet relatively few non-whites attend. Why?
Brother Ken, I saw your hand.
Good afternoon. Thank you for opening up this to other communities. That's something that's been sort of a head scratcher for me in our church at St. Nicholas. We say we're welcoming, and yet we have very few people, people of color or other than what is the demographic of our congregation coming and staying. And I think it has to do with our approach to worship. I think that we have been expecting other cultures to culturally commute to the way we address things. We are very cerebral, we're very print oriented, we're very traditional hymn oriented, we're very sit down and listen to what the pastor is saying oriented, rather than being more participational, being more call and response, being more emotional, more just kind of opening up to other forms of how different groups communicate with each other and communicate among each other. And so the problem is when you start as a leader moving in those directions, there's such a backlash from the participants, the congregation members, that you kind of sort of throw up your hands because you try something for a while and nobody still comes, and people are like, well, why are we singing this hymn? We're not even X, Y, and Z. And so it's why are we singing this Spanish hymn? Because nobody here speaks Spanish. Well, we're trying to be inclusive, and I don't know. It's really hard. The 11 o'clock hour being the most segregated hour of the week. Some of that is, even when we're open and eager to receive other cultures into our communities, it is really hard to help other people feel comfortable and welcome in our environments.
So what I'm hearing is that it's a challenge to, you want to project that everyone is welcome, and you want to be able to incorporate other types of worship in with what you have, but you want to make the people coming happy, but you want to make the people that are already there happy as well. And that's a challenge for a leader in a church, to keep the people that are already there happy, and also welcoming people in and making any changes that might be something that's more accommodating, or more, you said, approach to worship, that might be just something more charismatic that your church isn't used to, and just finding a balance.
Tara, excuse me a moment. I see on my screen that several people have used the hand icon. Hard for our facilitators to see. So if you'd like to be recognized, please physically wave your hand, which is much easier for them to see. I know Michael has had his electronic hand up for a while.
Okay. Any hand waves? I see Judy.
Judy, you're muted.
No,
You're still muted, Judy.
she doesn't know how to unmute.
Lower left
Touch
corner,
the little
Judy.
microphone icon, or maybe we can come back to.
There
Judy.
she is. She's okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I finally made it. So, okay, so I'm unmuted, but I really liked some of the things that you were saying, Brother Ken. I am kind of really thinking the same way that you are. Do you understand the culture of your church before we try to welcome other people whose culture we really are not really sure of, maybe? And I really think culture has a lot to do with the understanding of what people are, what is important in that culture. Do we really need to capture that importance to be welcoming? I think we have one question kind of like leads to another, but I think culture is a very important message. What is it that we eat? What is it that we listen to? What is it that we're interested in? What is it that makes us tick? How do we go about listening? And how do we respond to that?
So Judy, you're saying culture is a really important factor in this.
Yes, it is.
Understanding the culture of the church and really
Right.
getting a grasp on that is important. And then seeing how that does relate to everything else as well.
Yes.
Great. Thank you.
Tara, Michael Kent has had his hand up for a while.
Okay. Go ahead, Michael.
Unmute.
Unmute, please.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted now. My name is Michael Kent. I'm up here at All Saints. And I visit the majority of the Black churches in Calvert County as part of my duties with the NAACP, president of the Calvert County branch. And we were talking before, Ken and Judy are very much on track with this. The traditional churches like St. Edmund's and Mount Hope now have very, very small congregations. And they're trying to do the same thing with all Saints is doing, getting more people to come into their churches. The larger churches like Bethel, Brooks Church, and a couple of the others, it is a cultural thing. The younger people want more pizzazz, they want more singing, they want more bands playing music, things you didn't do traditionally in the Black church years and years ago. And that in part is also why these TV ministers are so popular, because they give people what they want. So it is a cultural, personal thing as to what people really want to get out of their church. And the smaller churches are able to hold on to the congregations that have some family connections to it. Their parents, grandparents, and so forth are buried there. And that's why they stay there and they're not going to leave. But it is the flashier churches now that get the larger congregations coming out. Thank you.
So you're saying that culture is really, with what you visited, culture really is a big issue when it comes to people's worship. And there's a lot of diversity out there just in Calvert County on what types of forms of worship that you have available to you. And, you know, the younger people are going to go for something maybe more charismatic with music. And then you've got the traditional folks that, you know, stay in their smaller churches. And then, you know, that gets passed down more in a familial way on that you continue to go to those churches. And that there's just a diversity in Calvert County. But that the churches that do seem to be more charismatic, you're saying you have larger numbers. All right.
Carol?
Yeah.
Nancy has her hand up as well.
Go ahead, Nancy.
Nancy, you're muted.
Did that? No, I didn't. So far, what I hear a lot about is church services. There are other things that churches do that can invite people in. I go to Middleham and St. Peter's, and we have a lot of programs that are outreach that bring people into our church, people from different backgrounds. You know, maybe that's the place to start rather than thinking about your liturgy and your church service is to go out in the streets. And Father Showers, our previous priest, used to go to McDonald's in Solomon's every Wednesday afternoon and buy a drink and just sit at a table and invite anybody who felt like they wanted to come talk to him. And he would buy them a Coke or whatever they wanted and just sit there and talk. He told me stories about all kinds of people who came to talk to him. He always went with his collar, so he was identifiable as a preacher of some sort. And so maybe that's something that churches, if they're looking to get out and, you know, interact with other groups, might think about. The other thing is fellowship. I mean, like I said before, there's no reason that you have to try to convince African Americans to come to your church. There are other churches around that you can start thinking about joint projects with, about finding out what they need to do, what they need help with, or what you need help with, and how you can meld your gifts and your assets and work together on things. I mean, I think those are ways you may not get them to come to your church, but you're still doing God's work, for heaven's sakes.
Laverne Cheryl Thompson has been raising her hand.
Okay, Cheryl, you want to go next?
Cheryl, you.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Sorry I'm late to the party.
Sorry, Cheryl.
I attend All Saints, but as I'm listening to the conversation and the, you know, culture certainly is a part of it, and it goes deeper than just how do we worship religiously. It's how are we in a place and space. So my experience back as a young adult, going to a white church for the very first time was absolute culture shock. But as a student of culture, because I'm a speech language pathologist and we have to study culture, it became very apparent to me that the way that churches operate come out of the culture. And I think Brother Ken was the one that talked about a literate methodology and service as opposed to an oral spoken word call and response. That came out of necessity because slaves were not allowed to learn to read and write. So whereas one church will traditionally sit in a service and read everything, and everybody sits there very still. In another culture, you've got to express yourself through movement. There has to be the call response. And that has just passed down through time, and that's what feels comfortable for some people. And what feels comfortable for others is something else. So when we talk about welcoming somebody into that environment, I think it was Judy that said, first of all, you've got to realize what the definition of your church culture is before you can say, well, why won't they come? Well, because this is what it means to be in our church. And how is that different than what it means to be in another church? So being able to, and that's kind of with anything within culture, with religion, with education, with what it means to be in fellowship even. So those are things that it can't be, we want to welcome you in, because that almost looks like we want you to come do it our way. And that's what we have to get rid of, is we want you to come do it our way. If you truly want to be in fellowship and have diversity, it's got to be not just in words welcoming for all, but in deeds welcoming for all.
So what I'm hearing, when we're talking about culture, you're bringing up the phrase culture shock, and that's a challenge, that there can be such a change from one church to the other that it can be, you know, a shock to the system even, to see how things are. And that's just another challenge to be considered. That's a great point, Cheryl. Is anybody else?
Judy?
Yes, I was just saying, you know, sometimes I think we kind of have like, we have to be careful that we don't establish a fake inclusiveness. That's my point.
You don't want to establish a fake inclusiveness.
Right. I mean, I'm not going to just welcome you because I know it's the right thing to do. I mean, I would probably do that knowing me. But what I'm saying is you can't just fake it. And I think sometimes we are we really do want people to come. We really do care that we understand them and they understand us. But we can't go to the point where we don't believe it.
So you want to not just say that you want to be welcoming, you want to be able to show.
Exactly. Everything has to be right.
Okay.
Cheryl has his hand up.
Cheryl Munn here. Sometimes I think that maybe the problem we see here is our problem that we see and others don't see it the same way. Because, you know, the point was made earlier, which is very true. People go where they feel like their needs are being met. And, you know, that can be in a lot of different ways. And it's cultural. And I don't know whether this is a possible model or something, but I was a chaplain in the Army for 29 years. And towards the end of my career, I had a lot of supervisory responsibilities. And for instance, on an installation, and this was part of Army doctrine too, we provided several different types of worship opportunities for the people. There was a Catholic service, there was a Jewish service, there was what we call the collective Protestant service, which was more like a Presbyterian, Methodist, Baptist kind of service. There was a gospel service, which was like a Black church experience, and that was predominantly what it was. We had denominational services and different kinds to meet the needs of the people on there. And so, you know, it was kind of what was just said. We on purpose developed a diversity of religious experiences on that installation. And it may be that, and see, yeah, I think All Saints is a very welcoming place, but it's not going to matter whatsoever if people don't feel like that it's meeting their needs. You know, it doesn't matter how welcoming we are if people don't think it's meeting their needs. So we may be asking kind of the wrong questions and looking at it from a wrong perspective. Maybe we need to, and what's our purpose for wanting people in anyway? And what's our purpose for wanting to make contact? For me, from my faith perspective, it's to try to bring Christ's love into people's lives and to bring us together, but in that Christian love. But the question is how do you go about doing that? And when I think back to that model, maybe very traditional churches like this, and let me hear me clearly on this. This would be very uncomfortable for me because I'm very traditional in my in my church experience. But you know, maybe churches like that need to start looking at offering different types of experiences that broaden out the opportunities for people to find their needs met.
So you're saying that it's important to understand the intentions behind even just the first step of being welcoming, but also to understand your intentions so you could understand better how to meet the needs of other people as well, to meet the needs of the congregation and for new members.
Yeah, why do why do we, is it just, well, as one person said, is it just to get butts in the pews and bucks in the plate, you know, or we just want to grow for growth's sake? What's the purpose? What's our basic purpose for wanting to, you know, the people to come in, to make contacts, to grow? You know, for me, it's you know, the message of the love of Christ and bringing the love of Christ into people's lives. That's the only reason. But how do you, to do that, you have to meet the needs of the people or they're not going to come. And it doesn't matter how welcoming you are, you know, it doesn't, and are we really that welcoming when, yeah, we'll welcome you in and do it our way.
Laverne, I think
Really,
Hale's got her hand up.
All Saints has his hand up. Adrian also.
Oh, well, hi again.
Ken,
Yes.
Hope's going now.
Can you hear me now?
Ken,
Yes,
Hope
Ken.
is up now.
I was
I'm
just,
sorry.
I was just
Hope.
gonna say,
Oh, go ahead, Hope. I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say a couple of things. I want to go back to, I think it was Brother Ken that said one thing that we kind of ignore in the Episcopal Church. To many people, our service is intimidating, simply because of the ritual, and we don't do a good job with explaining each aspect of the service, number one. Number two, I think that the lady from St. Stephen's Middleham made a good point in terms of we've got to go out and bring people in. Okay, just because you have diverse music or just because you're offering these services, it doesn't mean that the people are going to come. You've got to go out where people are and bring them in. And at that point, they've got to feel welcoming. I thought Judy Severson made a very good point that, are you doing this just because, okay, I know it's the right thing to do, but are you really feeling it in your heart? Because people can tell whether or not you're phony or not, whether or not you're just going through the gestures. And I think that is very, very, very important. I mean, are you really doing this because you want people to feel God's love? Or are you doing this because, okay, I know this is the right thing to do, but are you feeling it? So those are the 3 points I wanted to make. Our service is intimidating and we don't do enough to explain it step by step. We've got to go out and bring people in, go out where people are and bring them in. And you need to look in the mirror, search yourself to see if you are doing this because you want people to see God's love through your actions. And actions really do speak louder than words.
So
Okay.
you think outreach is also important to you. Nancy had brought this up a couple comments ago as well, that it's not just the act of the service itself, which you're saying can also be intimidating for somebody to just step into the church. And they could be intimidated by your service. It's not always clear what's going on to a newcomer. And that outreach and going out and really meeting people in real life is just another form of service that can be performed. And
it's helpful. I've been in churches, I've been in Episcopal churches where for example, in the program, under each segment of the service, there's just 1 or 2 lines, an explanation about what's going on, you know, and why that particular part of the service is being done. We don't do enough with teaching the terminology. I mean, you know, what it is that we're doing. And it really is, it really can be intimidating to people.
what I'm hearing is you're saying the service itself that you're already having can actually make some changes in that to make it a little bit more understandable
Yeah.
for newcomers.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Adrienne.
And also sometimes I've even seen instances where visitors that come into a church, you know, they will have someone, a member of the church, maybe sit with them.
Oh,
Point things out. I mean,
Okay.
we say we're welcoming, but we need to look at the definition of welcoming and think about steps that we can do that are sincerely welcoming.
Cheryl.
Just one quick comment, and that is, the question about why do we segregate on Sunday mornings? Well, I think the answer is really quite simple. And that is we go where we feel comfortable and where we think and where our needs are met. And I think that's what we do. Now, if we want more diversity, we have to see why, look at the picture and see how we can go about doing that. But that's, I don't see that necessarily as an evil thing or a bad thing. It's just, any church, people are going to go where they're comfortable and where they feel like their needs are being met.
Okay, I hate to draw this to a close. It's been very fascinating. I want to thank all of you for coming and participating, especially our facilitators, Laverne and Tara. Thank you very, very much.
You're welcome.
For all
Welcome.
who joined us who are not part of All Saints, I hope to see you all again at our next discussion series. Thank you all for coming. Thank you.